Hi, Jodi Daniels here. I'm the founder and CEO of Red Clover Advisors, a certified women's privacy consultancy. I'm a privacy consultant and a certified informational privacy professional, helping to provide practical privacy advice to overwhelmed companies.
Hi, Justin Daniels here. I am passionate about helping companies solve complex cyber and privacy challenges during the life cycle of their business. I do that through identifying the problem and coming up with practicable, implementable solutions. I am a subject matter expert in cybersecurity and a business attorney at Baker Donelson.
And this episode is brought to you by Red Clover Advisors. We help companies to comply with data privacy laws and establish customer trust so that they can grow and nurture integrity. We work with companies in a variety of fields, including technology, SaaS, e-commerce, media agencies, professional, and financial services. In short, we use data privacy to transform the way companies do business. Together, we're creating a future where there is greater trust between companies and consumers. To learn more, visit redcloveradvisors.com.
So before I introduce our guest today, what is today, Jodi?
Yes, the day of recording. It's Data Privacy Day. Happy Data Privacy Day. Woohoo!
And this is also my first episode as a fully FAA licensed commercial drone pilot with a drone with even a better camera to come and surveil your whereabouts during the workday.
Thank you. You can keep stalking the dog. It's great.
With that in mind, I want to introduce our guest today. So we have Kenji Kuramoto, who is the founder and CEO of Acuity, which has provided fractional CFO and accounting services for thousands of entrepreneurs and small businesses. Hello, Kenji.
Hello, Jodi and Justin.
We're so glad you're here. This is going to be
what a momentous day to be here on National Data Privacy Day. Justin getting some kind of licenses. It sounds like he can go break privacy laws and spy on people with. I mean, it's all coming together. This is perfect.
Everyone should have a drone pilot in their family.
Sure, of course.
Yes, I'll spare you the 5 months of he's studying every Sunday night and all this other stuff, but I'm excited. I wanted to fly an airplane like the ones that go in the sky, and Jodi's like, yeah, you're not going to do that. So this is where we came to our marital compromise.
Is there such a thing as a Top Gun for drone pilots? Is that something you can pursue?
Well, it's funny you said that because on LinkedIn, I said, move over Goose and Maverick. Ghost Rider says the pattern is not full. And here I come.
Maybe one day.
Maybe one day.
Someday.
It's not as easy to fly in certain ways near stuff as you would think. But with the AI and whatnot, we could do a whole show. But let's talk about...
We did.
Yes, but we could do another.
We could.
All right. So let's talk about fractional CFO and let's begin. So Kenji, talk to us a little bit about your interesting career path to where you are today.
So I guess where I started, I somehow in college picked accounting as a major. I'm not sure which kind of broken individuals do that, but I was one of them. And
I did too.
Oh, you did too? Oh,
I did.
Jodi, I knew there was something about you that
There
like,
was.
yeah, just our. So coming out of college, went to go work in the Big Six back in the day when there was a Big Six for a firm called Arthur Andersen. And if you're of a certain age, you may have heard of Arthur Andersen. If you're not, maybe you've heard of them because you're big into watching documentaries about major fraud cases. So, that's where I started my career. I was not involved with any of that, but I started in their Atlanta office working in the audit practice. And while it was a wonderful place to start a career, it was not the most riveting of career choices I felt. So I left about 4 or 5 years in and went to go work for a technology services company. This is right around 2000. So this was when the first big .com bubble was building. And so I had thought, oh, great, I'm going to go and help them go public. Because if you had any kind of form of technology in the business, that's what you did. You just naturally went public. And so I went there as their controller, which is kind of a mid-tier level financial role in an accounting function. And then about a year after I was there, the old bubble burst and we weren't going public. And the mission became, how do we keep the small startup technology company from completely cratering? And our CFO took off. So I got promoted to the role of CFO as a pretty young professional trying to keep this thing out of the ditch. We managed to do that and ran that business for about 4 years. Really enjoyed kind of the small entrepreneurial tech field. And then I found myself just with other friends of mine who were entrepreneurs or small business owners were kind of asking for things like, hey, could you help me with this financial model? Or I think may want to start something. And we'd go out and get drinks or catch up and I'd kind of share some advice. And I was having fun doing that, kind of just moonlighting, doing that, getting compensated in time with friends or with a drink or dinner. And thought, this could be kind of fun actually to do something more consultative around my two backgrounds, right? So one being having a fairly good understanding of what an accounting infrastructure should look like from a big global firm perspective, but how do you apply that into a smaller startup company perspective? So that's when Acuity started. That was 2004. Can't believe 17 years ago. And started with the very first service line that we offered was fractional CFO services. So we started looking for Atlanta entrepreneurs who were just like some of my friends who just said, hey, I certainly don't need you full time, but could you spare a couple hours a week, a month to kind of help with this CFO role? And so that's how we started.
And so 17 years later, you have fancy hats on. And
Absolutely.
I am aware of Arthur Andersen. I actually started my career at Deloitte for 5 years and then left and went into Sarbanes-Oxley implementations because that's what was the big thing after. And I was actually just talking to someone how I don't hear about accounting frauds anymore. So either the news is not doing a good job of reporting them, or Sarbanes-Oxley is doing a good job of mitigating them.
They're certainly there. There's probably some less with newer controls and things like Sarbanes-Oxley. However, also maybe just our Arthur Andersen Enron one just sucked all the air out of the room, and nothing can compare to anything that large anymore. So everything just seems,
Exactly, super small in comparison. So
right.
Talk to us more about, how does a company know it needs a fractional CFO, and what does a fractional CFO do?
Yeah. So it can get a little confusing. And so I think the simplest way to think about what a CFO does is that really almost everything a CFO is doing should be forward-looking. And in fact, much of accounting work we do is historic by nature. An event happens, a transaction occurs, and the accounting team goes and organizes it in a nice way and sticks it in essentially a database, and out you get meaningful financial data. But a lot of that is very historic in nature. So a lot of the roles below a CFO, like a controller that I was for many years, and we offer those services, or bookkeeping, the best way to think about those are activities that are kind of happening currently on your financials, or maybe in retrospect, you're trying to organize them to get ready for taxes. The CFO function should predominantly, if not totally, be forward-looking. And so you're doing financial modeling, you're doing forecasting, budgeting, and planning. Oftentimes if there's a lot of external stakeholders involved in the business, the CFO will play a more external role in meeting with bankers, investors, folks like that, helping kind of manage relationships with the board of directors. But yeah, I like to think of it when people are kind of confused about, well, which role goes where, is that it really should be in a very forward-looking state. So that's what we kind of provide to small businesses. Again, that's a function that most of them will maybe have some aspect of, hey, I've got someone who's working in QuickBooks for me, who's keeping things organized. Is that a CFO? And we typically say, no, that's probably not, unless for some reason that person is also doing some excellent modeling and forecasting to help the business make some decisions about future events.
So is there a baseline or a size company? So in other words, when should someone be thinking, oh, I really need that person?
Yeah. So it tends to be somewhat industry, depending on the industry, the size of the company, but also what events are happening. And so you can be a traditional business, you might not have much in the way of needing a CFO as you hit a few $1 million in revenue. You might just very sporadically need someone just to help you think about a budget, or maybe you're going to need some help thinking about going and getting a loan at the bank. So you might have only very specific needs And it may be worthwhile engaging someone just once, twice a year, every blue moon for something like that. When it starts to become more, hey, we should probably get someone in a dedicated role. And this could be full-time or it could be part-time, depending on how much these events happen, is we typically see that all of a sudden either the business grows and scales dramatically from a revenue standpoint, usually the complexity follows there, or you could be a startup company and suddenly you've got a cap table full of a lot of investors who are expecting good, clear reporting and accountability, and maybe revenues are small, if not small, maybe non-existent, but you're raising significant rounds of capital to where then all of a sudden having someone in there to kind of do some of that board reporting back and forth is typically where we also see businesses needing CFOs presence ramp up a bit more. So those are a couple different flavors. If you're more kind of an organic growth story, I would say that by the time you're kind of hitting $4 or $5 million in revenue, there's certainly probably a few needs you have on a somewhat regular basis. If you are a investor-backed company, you're probably going to need it much sooner than that. Just some of that's determined based on the complexity and size of the investor deals you're doing.
Super helpful. Thanks.
Yeah.
So I think now, Kenji, we want to take the conversation with the CFO and focus it a little bit more on this privacy and security concept, and would love to get your thoughts around the CFO's role in these earlier stage companies and how the privacy or the security issue does or maybe doesn't come up when it should.
Yeah, it's a great question because it's, we view the CFO as having a role in that, certainly. But again, these are small, early stage companies. And I think, you're limited in your resources for what you're going to be able to do. We're a small business, right? We got started, Jodi, I think a Red Clover, right? You get that going and there's not enough people to wear enough hats. We're kind of growing into those roles. So how do you approach security and privacy? There is no full-time CFO there. There's no full-time CTO. There's no chief privacy officer there. So how do you start implementing some of the things that someone would do in those roles in a larger company? And I think that the CFO role is certainly not the expert when it comes to security and privacy. I viewed that what a CFO can help with the most in that case is helping think what the financial impact of a privacy or security issue is. And I think that's important because, while you're helping quantify that risk, you can then start prioritizing the risk. You can really get a sense of, okay, going, oh gosh, if that event does happen, the magnitude of that is much larger than the magnitude of this other risk. So being limited in resources, we probably need to take our limited resources and apply them to where the magnitude of risk from a privacy or security issue is going to be the highest. And so I think it kind of starts there in being able to, first of all, just assess the risk so that at least the business can be aware of it. And then you have to kind of start looking for professionals or other people to help you. So that's where the first place I like to make sure our CFO team is thinking in terms of quantifying of risk.
So kind of, Kenji, as a follow-up to that, when I've worked with smaller companies, usually the privacy or the security comes up in one of two instances. One, you have an event, and now, as I like to say, you are reborn, because if you've dealt with ransomware and it shuts down your company, that gets everybody's attention. But the other one is when you want to do business with a larger enterprise who starts asking you the questions, or who says, hey, Mr. Startup or small company, I like what you're doing, but if you can't meet my privacy or security requirements, that's going to be a barrier for you to even get in the door to get to that revenue in the contract.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And we see that quite a bit. I think that there's nothing like, and it's unfortunate when there is that, like the first thing you mentioned, Justin, of an event's happened, right? Suddenly, wow, all these things like policies and procedures and proper use of tools and technology and training suddenly become important when they weren't, because there's been an event now. And sometimes that event very clearly has a dollar denomination attached to it, which nothing like that to get a business owner's attention when money's going to have to go out the door to deal with an issue. But also, it's more on the second part of that opportunity cost. Hey, you built a business, depending on who you're working with, could be a government entity, could be a large-scale Fortune 500 that is going to have some requirements to say, hey, to do business with us, we're going to ask you to jump through some hoops. And that's just the cost of doing business, to where We're going to have to go and operate in a way that shows more transparency into our processes, into how well we're holding customer data and managing it and keeping it secure. So those do come about. And again, I think we see it across the board in different places, but in different scales. You could be a venture-funded software company that is doing electronic medical records, right, for state-run medical centers. And you go, okay, you may not be very large, but you can just immediately think through all of the different areas of security and privacy issues around investors, HIPAA, patient lawsuits, intellectual property protection. There's just a multitude of things there. And you might think that like the local pizza joint, right, as a small business goes, well, their issues pale in comparison. They might in certain ways, but they're just different, right? There's credit card fraud. We've seen issues with security, the way that people have used security videos and cash theft. So there's different orders of magnitude, and it's not always applicable to every business owner. But yeah, we see it from whoops, an event happened, and it's costing us. And then also, whoops, we're not going to get this amazing opportunity if we don't put some things in place, depending on who the business is.
So when you see those types of things, and let's take maybe those technology companies more than the pizza joint, because they're really going to have that B2B impact a lot more, and they're a bigger target from an external viewpoint. How are they starting to tackle privacy? And, so there's these risks, the CFOs recognizing there's a financial consequence either to revenue, won't get the deal signed. There's a financial consequence to potential investment, might not get the continued investment, or there's the financial consequence of a data breach. The marketing team over there might be talking about trust and brand and the impact from that standpoint. So when companies have these types of conversations, what happens next, and what role do you all play in those conversations?
Sure. Like I mentioned, I think first is the awareness, and sometimes when you put a price tag on it, which again should be the accounting financial team should be able to help put a price tag on it, that should help drive some of that awareness. Okay, we've got some issues here that could potentially bubble up. We need to kind of deal with them. And then I think to your point, Jodi, like what's next? Okay, great. You've got some of these risks. How do we go about them? And in some cases, you certainly look for whether there are just processes that can be deployed, to go ahead and start mitigating some of the risk. Are there just some better processes that we need to put in place? And then after processes, usually kind of maybe in conjunction with processes, we start talking about certain systems. Do we need some external tools that are going to help mitigate risk, and some things around there? And then oftentimes, once we've kind of, I won't say exhausted, but maybe put forth great effort on the process side, the system side, then you may be looking at from an insurance standpoint, where are there gaps? How much can we really do as an internal organization in different software? And where are we going to need to find some places to do some gap fill? Because maybe we just can't tap down every single risk. So we need to maybe look for some coverages to kind of fill in between. And does that, do the combination of those things get us to a place whether we can talk to the business owners or the investors or whoever it may be, say, hey, that's going to put us in a good enough place where we can still execute on the business and not be so worried about either the likelihood of huge expense exposure or the huge loss of revenue. And then that needs to be reviewed and updated on a regular basis, going back and assessing those risks. And so that's usually the way that we typically go about it. In many of those places, when it comes to processes and systems, we're not the experts. I'd be, calling Jodi or Justin and going, hey, what do you guys think from this? Here's something from a HIPAA perspective that's outside of our league. What would you recommend? But someone, and usually a good place to start, is the accounting financial team. They typically tend to be a little bit more process oriented, a little bit more risk attuned, is a good place to start that. But then oftentimes you need to bring in those other experts to help build that entire risk mitigation profile in place for the company.
So Kenji, you mentioned the issue of insurance, because I find in most smaller companies from a cyber perspective, the CFO is intimately involved in that, because that's, for many companies, smaller ones, I like to say, they use cyber insurance as a panacea and not a tool in risk mitigation. But my question is, obviously, there's data out there about cyber breaches and whatnot, but a lot of things that Jodi always talks about, as I do as well, is about the reputation of the brand. And I've been in conversation where people, well, Justin, how do I put a figure? How do I quantitatively evaluate that? And I don't always have a good answer. And I'd love to get your perspective, because there is that trust of brands. We're seeing what Apple just came out with their no iOS for privacy, and Facebook and others. But for smaller companies, love to get your perspective on how do you quantify this elusive concept of the reputation of your brand from a privacy and security perspective?
It's whenever a client of ours says, hey, we need some help measuring or doing ROI on things like marketing or branding, right? It's a challenge. I mean, it's kind of an interesting challenge, right? That's sometimes very interesting projects, but it's also difficult. There's usually some ranges of possibilities or ways to approach that. Again, I think there's one of the ways that I think sometimes can be a little more resonant with clients, even none of these are perfect, is in thinking about clients who are going to maybe run through an RFP process or have a very competitive process when it comes to acquiring clients. And, we know that we're going to be one of 3 vendors looked at here, or however many. And in certain cases, we can say, gosh, we can start looking at what the cost of acquiring a client is. And anytime that maybe someone has a better brand than we do, and from the sense of whatever it might be. And maybe in this case, it would be in reputation because they didn't have a breach. We got, oh my gosh, we had a breach. That's probably going to affect our close rate when we're going competitively against these other firms that haven't. And you can start actually, if it's going to impact your closing rate of how many deals you close, and you can estimate that to some extent, you can actually start working into, well, gosh, if our close rate goes down, then what that's really telling you as a business is the cost to acquire a new customer just went up, just got more expensive for you. And so, can you specifically say that because of the reputation image of our brand that we know that it had a 18% impact? Probably not exactly, but you can probably start working through those and getting at least in mind of going, okay, where do we have to protect reputation enough to where we just can't keep losing out to these other competitors of ours? And that may be a way to approach it from, again, I usually like doing that with entrepreneurs. It's a little bit more of an, I think, a positive or way to look at it, going, okay, we want to close more deals. We want our reputation higher. We want to improve that close rate of an acquisition of new businesses. The other way you can go at it, and that's a bit more the carrot approach, you can go the stick approach, right? If you want to go, well, hey, let's take a look at what this has cost other businesses who've had a reputation hit because of privacy issues or lawsuits. And you can dig around a little bit and talk to some of your favorite lawyer friends, right? And say, hey, can you give me some insights on what you've seen, the typical cost for someone to go defend this type of legal action if it comes up? And that's a bit more of the stick approach, but you can kind of use those as a little bit of some ways to quantify and get at least some dollars in mind of either lost revenue again or the expense if, again, that brand or reputation takes a hit. But it's still a little bit, there's going to be some art in that. Anytime we always say there's marketing and branding in there, there's a little bit of art, not purely science on quantifying that ROI.
I think that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned something that's really interesting to me, the carrot and the stick. So there's going to be more privacy laws coming, more security breaches. And I'm very curious to know, when you're talking with companies, do people gravitate, just kind of your sample size of those that you've worked with over the years, do they gravitate more to the stick or the carrot?
I think ours go more for the carrot. I mean, we're dealing with entrepreneurs who've started something and their stars are in their eyes and they are just going. They tend to be more of a ask for forgiveness. So I think they have a natural bend and lean toward, I'll deal with that risk if it pops up. They're looking for, how do I take down more business? How do I grow? And so, I think that's where most of them have a proclivity in that direction, is they're already thinking. They don't usually need a whole lot of stimulation around the opportunity. They sometimes need to go, hey, time out a little bit here. Again, I know I'm playing the CFO, wet blanket, the person that says no, but someone in the organization needs to be talking about some of the discipline we have to where we do need to be cognizant of, new things coming out. We've seen, I give an example of this one is, I think a lot of small businesses, especially in the tech space, go through, probably some gray areas, and they shouldn't be gray areas around canned spam, right? Because how do you go and grow really quick, right? Oh, we just closed our Series A and we've got a couple $1 million, and the investors all say that they want us to grow sales and marketing. So we've seen that very frequently as a very fast way that people love to jump in and go, well, let's grow sales and marketing. Well, let's go get some lists and let's pump it in some systems and let's go, right? And that is a very frequent one that we see that clients and tech companies don't always consider, like, are we doing this in a way that follows some of the legislation out there? And they don't really stop and ask that. It's more like, hey, investors said we got to grow. We got to grow sales and marketing, acquire new customers. We'll figure out that later. I don't know if you've seen that thing. I know that's a place that you work in, Jodi, but
I see all different kinds of things. The other one that people should pay a lot of attention to is just in the United States is TCPA, the texting one, which texting is supposed to continue to catapult even more. People are going to want to jump on that bandwagon, and it is a polar opposite to canned spam. It is an opt-in approach. So anyone listening, it is opt-in, and there are plenty of plaintiffs' attorneys just waiting to pounce and find the companies that are not doing what they're supposed to be. But certainly that is true across all types of marketing channels. People want to grow, and that's the interesting challenge. And why I asked about the carrot versus stick approach is oftentimes what I see is it's a lower priority, but it's a real business risk where they're losing deals. And so they're losing sales. And then when there's an issue, aside from the lost sales, you potentially have the increased cost for fines. That's just very expensive to deal with. So that was why I was so interested to hear what you see.
Yeah, we've always liked, it's probably one of the reasons why we've liked working with startups. One, my partner and I and our team loves just new technology and things like that, which is great. So many of us have worked in startups, but also because at some point, usually investors come in, professional investors come in, and there's nothing like, as we say, all of a sudden professional investors coming in that allows the organization to quickly go, you know what, time to kind of act more like professionals. So let's get better for us in the accounting world. It's like, let's get better revenue recognition policies, GAAP-based financials. But we tend to see other places too, where they say, hey, let's go and fix some other risks here. That in certain cases, it's been a little harder to get the self-made entrepreneur who's the only person on the cap table to really make a move on that when they're pulling down a lot of money each year and they're like, things are fine. It's hard to sometimes get them motivated. So
fair point.
It's funny you say that, Kenji, because I've spoken to at investor events where they've brought me in to do a tabletop or speak about cyber. And from a professional investor standpoint, I've had them tell me, yeah, that's about 10th or 12th on our list. So there's obviously an education gap there as well, because in a Series A, I'm worried about keeping the lights on and growing revenue, Justin. I'll deal with this problem. Yep. The challenge comes is if they get the problem, it could wipe out the entire business, because I've seen that as well. But I would like, before we ask you a personal question, to say, when you guys think of this carrot and stick, I'm thinking about chocolate and peanut butter and the Reese's peanut butter cup, and I'm thinking it's more of a chocolatey kind. That's how I'm thinking about this approach now, because I have the Reese's peanut butter cup in my mind.
See, I have someone that calls it chocolate covered broccoli. Everyone wants chocolate. They don't want broccoli. You have to eat more broccoli. So give them their chocolate, but then cover it in broccoli. Yeah.
Got to dress it up somewhere.
I'm thinking this will be your set. Red clover with the chocolate covered
broccoli.
Anyway, so Kenji, would love to get your perspective as a business owner who also advises small businesses as well. Do you have a best personal privacy tip?
I'll just share one that I've been doing more and more these days. It's around two-factor authentication, and is really trying to move away from some of the text-based. I think two-factor authentication is great. I'm not crazy about some of the SMS-based or text-based. Candidly, because we've had some problems with that and have started really using more of some of the authentication tools, Google Authenticator, Authy, things that are a little more secure, just because, I think you can realize, depending on what kind of device you're using, you can get your SMS text or your messages coming in on your computer. And so in some cases, you lose your computer and someone gets access to it, the two-factor authentication doesn't really work that well because they're also getting the authentication. We do a lot of work in crypto, which is a whole other ball of wax, which we should have. You should, if you ever want to get into that, have my business partner on, who's the real expert. But we've had some issues where we've been targeted with SMS attacks to us because these crypto companies can sit on a lot of currency that can disappear quickly. And we've seen that. I think people think that, oh, I'm getting a text message, which means it's secure. And if you don't understand the full process, that people can actually go and obfuscate that and take over a phone account. And that may be not everyone going through that, but I would say that we've seen more and more sophisticated hacks around that, where I think people just assume that text-based two-factor is the gold standard. And I think there's some better approaches out there that are actually pretty easy just by adding on your phone Authy or Google Authenticator, which we're starting to see more and more. I think some of the better software is requiring that as the standard versus some of the tools. And that's a relatively easy one that people can add that doesn't add much complexity to their day. So
yeah, that's a great recommendation. I use Authy and really enjoy it.
Do you?
Yep. What's nice about Authy is it can be on your computer or your phone, and they're in sync, which is great.
It is nice. Yep.
So when you're not using two-factor authentication and not advising people, what do you like to do for fun?
Well, let's see. What do I like to do for fun? I think most recently, the thing I've been doing, I think everyone's got their COVID hobbies, right? So, or something they're doing there. Mine has been a little funky, and I started brewing my own beer. I know lots of people were making their own bread and things like that. And I thought, well, how about the liquid version of what they call bread? And so, yeah, I've been brewing my own beer. So the basement, an unused portion of the basement's turned a little bit into my little brewery area. I'm on batch number, I think 11 now. I'm getting better slowly. So I still foist these beverages on friends of mine, and some of them are, good enough friends that tell me the actual truth. Some of them kind of go, "Oh, Kenji, it's great," and probably dump it out, as soon as I leave. But it's actually been kind of fun. It's been something that I've enjoyed doing. Takes a little bit of time, but it's been fun. Actually, the most fun part about it has been whether they're friends in the neighborhood or other friends. I sometimes just go surprise them and leave a couple bottles on their doorstep or stick them in their garage. Like, hey, go check on your workbench. I put a couple bottles out there. And, this is not great beer, mind you. But I think it's been kind of fun. Like you feel like you're, leaving little gifts and people get a kick out of it. So that's been kind of my fun thing I've been doing more recently. We'll see if that continues to go at the pace it has been. I don't know if there's going to be a brewery in my future. I don't think so. But it's certainly been a fun pastime while I'm at home more often these days. So.
Excellent. Well, Kenji, where can people find you and connect and learn more?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter. You can reach out to me there. It's just Kenji Kuramoto is my Twitter handle. You can connect with me over on our website, which is just acuity.co. So not .com, but just acuity.co. You can find me there, and love talking to other small business owners. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. It was great to have you.
It's great seeing you guys.